Captain Sarah Mitchell had served her country for 15 years. She had led soldiers through dust storms in foreign deserts, made split-second decisions that saved lives, and earned every ribbon on her uniform through sweat and sacrifice. But on this Tuesday morning at Fort Henderson in North Carolina, none of that seemed to matter. The trouble started in the mess hall during breakfast. Sarah sat with her unit, quietly eating oatmeal and reviewing the day's training schedule. Her dark hair was pulled back in the regulation bun she'd worn for years. She was focused on her work, not looking for trouble. Sergeant Derek Vance walked past her table. He was relatively new to the base, transferred in just 3 months ago. He had a reputation for being loud and cocky, the kind of soldier who talked more than he listened. He stopped behind Sarah's chair. "Captain Mitchell," he said, his voice dripping with false respect. "I couldn't help but notice your hair is touching your collar. That's against regulation, isn't it?" Sarah reached back and felt her bun. It was perfectly in place, exactly as it should be. "My hair is within regulation, Sergeant," she said calmly, not even turning around. Vance leaned down, speaking louder now so others could hear. "I don't think so, ma'am. Looks pretty long to me. Maybe we've been going easy on the women around here. You know, special treatment and all." The mess hall grew quiet. Soldiers at nearby tables stopped eating. Everyone knew what was happening. This wasn't about hair regulations. This was about respect, or rather, the lack of it. Sarah stood up slowly and turned to face him. She was shorter than Vance by several inches, but she met his eyes with steady calm. "Sergeant Vance, my hair meets every requirement in the uniform code. If you have a concern, you can file it through proper channels." Vance smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Or maybe we should just fix the problem right now. Save everyone the paperwork." He pulled out a small pair of clippers from his cargo pocket, the kind used for quick field haircuts. "What do you say, Captain? Let's make sure you're squared away." Sarah's jaw tightened. She knew she was being baited. She knew Vance wanted her to lose her temper, to give him a reason to file a complaint about her. She had seen this game before. Some men never got comfortable taking orders from women, no matter how much experience those women had. "Put those away, Sergeant," Sarah said quietly. "That's an order." But Vance had an audience now, and he was enjoying it. "With all due respect, ma'am, I'm just trying to maintain standards. Isn't that what we're all supposed to do?" Two of Vance's friends, both junior sergeants, moved in beside him. One of them snickered. "Maybe the captain's too used to getting special privileges," he said. "You know how it is." Sarah felt her face grow hot, but she kept her voice level. "This is your last warning. Stand down." Vance looked around the mess hall, playing to the crowd. "You know what? I think we need to make an example here. Show everyone that rules apply to everybody." Before Sarah could react, he grabbed her arm. She tried to pull away, but his friends moved in quickly. They were stronger, and there were 3 of them. In the confusion and struggle, Vance turned on the clippers. Sarah heard the buzz near her ear. She felt a hand grip the back of her head, holding her still. The room seemed to freeze. No one moved to help her. Some soldiers looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to get involved. Others watched with shock or ugly satisfaction. The clippers bit into her hair. Sarah felt the tug as long strands fell away. Vance worked quickly, roughly, cutting jagged paths across her scalp. It wasn't a neat military cut. It was a humiliation, plain and simple. He was making sure everyone understood that. When he finally stepped back, Sarah's beautiful dark hair lay in clumps on the floor around her boots. Her scalp showed through in patches where he'd cut too close. She looked like she'd been attacked, not groomed. Vance held up the clippers like a trophy. "There, now you're definitely in regulation, Captain." The mess hall door slammed open with a crack like thunder. Part 2. The General's Fury. General Robert Hayes stood in the doorway of the mess hall. His face darkened with an anger that made even the toughest soldiers shrink back. He was a decorated veteran with 30 years of service, a man known for his fairness, but also for his fierce protection of military discipline and honor. He had been walking past the mess hall when he heard the commotion. Through the window, he'd seen enough to understand exactly what was happening. "Attention!" His voice boomed through the room like a cannon blast. Every soldier in the mess hall jumped to their feet, standing rigid at attention. Chairs scraped, forks clattered to tables. The room fell into absolute silence. General Hayes walked slowly down the center aisle. His boots struck the floor with deliberate, measured steps. His eyes were fixed on Sergeant Vance, who still held the clippers in his hand, his confident smile beginning to fade. The general stopped directly in front of Vance. He looked at the clippers. He looked at the hair scattered on the floor. He looked at Sarah's butchered head. Then he looked back at Vance. "Give me your name, rank, and serial number," the general said quietly. The quiet was somehow more terrifying than his earlier shout. Vance's voice shook slightly. "Sergeant Derek Vance, sir. Serial number—" "I didn't ask for excuses or explanations," General Hayes interrupted. "Do you know who you just assaulted, Sergeant?" "Sir, I was just enforcing regulation." "You just physically restrained and humiliated Captain Sarah Mitchell," the general continued, his voice rising with each word. "Do you know who Captain Mitchell is, Sergeant? Do you have any idea who you just put your hands on?" Vance opened his mouth, but no words came out. The general turned to address the entire mess hall. "Let me educate you all. Captain Mitchell served 3 tours overseas. She led a medical evacuation team that rescued 47 wounded soldiers under enemy fire. She was awarded the Bronze Star for valor. She was awarded the Purple Heart after taking shrapnel while protecting her unit." Sarah stood perfectly still, her eyes forward. Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. General Hayes walked around Vance in a slow circle. "But more importantly, Sergeant, Captain Mitchell is my niece. She is family to me, and you just physically assaulted her in front of a room full of witnesses." The color drained from Vance's face. His friends, who had helped hold Sarah down, looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. "You didn't enforce regulation," the general continued. "You committed battery against a superior officer. You publicly humiliated a decorated war hero, and you did it because you have a problem with women in uniform." "Sir, I didn't know," Vance started. "You didn't know she was my niece?" The general's eyes blazed. "That's what you're going with? So if she wasn't related to me, this would have been acceptable? Is that your defense?" "No, sir, I just meant—" "You meant to embarrass her. You meant to put her in her place. You succeeded in one thing, Sergeant. You showed everyone in this room exactly what kind of soldier you are." General Hayes turned to the military police officers who had appeared in the doorway, alerted by the commotion. "Captain Mitchell, I want you to press full charges against these 3 men. Assault, conduct unbecoming, violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice." "Everything." Sarah finally spoke, her voice steady despite everything. "Uncle Robert, I can handle this through—" "No." The general's tone left no room for argument. "You've been handling disrespect and discrimination quietly for too long. I've watched you take the high road year after year, while men like this try to drive you out. Not this time. This ends now." He turned back to Vance. "You 3 are confined to quarters pending court-martial. You will not speak to anyone about this incident. You will not approach Captain Mitchell or any member of her unit, military police. Escort them out." As the MPs moved forward to take Vance and his friends away, Vance made one last mistake. "This is bullshit," he muttered under his breath. "She gets special treatment because she's related to—" General Hayes moved faster than anyone expected for a man of 60. He stepped directly into Vance's face. "What did you say?" Vance went pale and silent. "Captain Mitchell earned her rank through 15 years of exemplary service," the general said, his voice like ice. "She never asked me for special treatment. She never traded on our relationship. In fact, most people on this base didn't even know we were related because she insisted on making her own way. The only special treatment happening here is the restraint I'm showing by not handling this personally." The MPs led the 3 men out. The mess hall remained frozen, every soldier standing at attention. General Hayes turned to Sarah. For the first time, his expression softened. Captain, you're dismissed. Report to the base hospital for documentation of your injuries. Then take the rest of the day. That's an order. Sarah saluted. Yes, sir. As she walked toward the door, the general called after her. Sarah. She turned back. I'm proud of you. Your parents would be too. Part 3. The Investigation. Sarah sat in the base hospital's examination room while a nurse gently documented the cuts and scrapes on her scalp. Each photograph felt like another layer of humiliation being preserved forever. She stared at the wall, trying to disconnect from what was happening. You're going to need to keep these areas clean, the nurse said kindly. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with gentle hands and kind eyes. Some of these cuts are deeper than they should be. He really went after you. Sarah nodded but didn't speak. If she spoke, she might cry, and she'd already promised herself she wouldn't cry today. The nurse paused in her work. I've been at this base for 22 years. I've seen a lot of things. But this, she shook her head. This was cruel. You didn't deserve that. Thank you, Sarah managed to say. After the examination, Sarah was escorted to the office of Colonel Patricia Andrews, the base's equal opportunity officer. Colonel Andrews was a sharp woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Captain Mitchell, please sit down. Colonel Andrews gestured to a chair across from her desk. I know this has been a difficult morning. I want you to know that we take this incident extremely seriously. Sarah sat, acutely aware of her butchered hair. She'd looked in the mirror at the hospital. It was worse than she'd thought. Patches of scalp showed through where Vance had pressed too hard. The remaining hair stood up in jagged tufts. She looked like a victim, and she hated it. I need to ask you some questions, Colonel Andrews continued. I know you've been through trauma, but the sooner we document everything, the stronger the case will be. For the next hour, Sarah recounted every detail. Vance's comments, his friends blocking her, the feeling of hands holding her down while the clippers buzzed, the laughter she'd heard from some corners of the mess hall. Colonel Andrews took notes without interrupting. When Sarah finished, the colonel set down her pen. Captain, I want you to know something. This isn't the first complaint we've had about Sergeant Vance. Sarah looked up, surprised. 3 weeks ago, Lieutenant Chen filed a report about inappropriate comments Vance made during a training exercise. Last month, Corporal Johnson reported that Vance had made disparaging remarks about women soldiers to a group of new recruits. Both reports were filed, but no action was taken because the incidents were considered minor. Words, not actions. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked. Because this isn't an isolated incident. It's an escalation. Vance has been testing boundaries, and no one stopped him. So he kept pushing until he felt comfortable enough to physically assault a superior officer in a room full of witnesses. Colonel Andrews leaned forward. The system failed you, Captain. We should have acted sooner. Sarah felt something shift inside her. She'd thought she was alone in this, that maybe she was being too sensitive or making too big a deal of casual disrespect. But she wasn't alone. Other women had spoken up and been ignored. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now we build an airtight case. Vance and his 2 accomplices are looking at court-martial for assault, conduct unbecoming, and violation of Article 93 of the UCMJ, cruelty and maltreatment of subordinates under their command. But Vance wasn't He was on duty. You were on duty. He used his position and physical force to humiliate you. That's maltreatment. Colonel Andrews pulled out a thick file. We've already started interviewing witnesses from the mess hall. So far, we have 12 soldiers willing to testify about what they saw. Over the next few days, Sarah tried to return to normal duty, but everything had changed. Some soldiers looked at her with sympathy. Others avoided her eyes. A few women soldiers quietly approached her to share their own stories of harassment and disrespect that they'd never officially reported. The worst part was the stares. Every time Sarah walked across the base, people looked at her ruined hair, some with pity, some with curiosity. She felt exposed, like Vance had stripped away more than just her hair. He'd stripped away her dignity. On the third day, Sarah made a decision. She went to the base barber shop and asked the barber to shave her entire head clean. If people were going to stare, she'd give them something to stare at on her own terms. The barber, an older man named Frank who'd been cutting military hair for 30 years, looked at her with understanding. "You sure, Captain?" "I'm sure." When Frank finished, Sarah looked at herself in the mirror. Her scalp was smooth, and even now, the angry red marks were healing. She looked different, harder somehow, but also strangely freed. That afternoon, General Hayes called her to his office. Part 4. The Trial. The court-martial was held in the base's main administrative building, in a formal hearing room that had seen countless cases over the decades. Sergeant Vance, along with Sergeants Mike Torres and Ryan Blake, sat at the defense table in their dress uniforms, looking considerably less confident than they had in the mess hall. Sarah sat in the front row of the gallery, her shaved head held high. She'd chosen to attend every day of the trial, even though, as the victim, she wasn't required to be there for all proceedings. She wanted them to see her. She wanted them to know she wasn't hiding. The prosecution, led by Major Carla Stevens, presented a devastating case. 12 eyewitnesses testified about what they'd seen in the mess hall. The base security cameras had captured some of the incident. The hospital photographs showed the cuts and scrapes on Sarah's scalp. But the most damaging testimony came from the other women soldiers who'd been harassed by Vance and his friends. Lieutenant Amanda Chen took the stand and described how Vance had told her during a training exercise that women don't belong in combat roles and that she should stick to nursing or desk work. When she'd objected, he'd laughed and said she was too emotional to handle criticism. Corporal Jessica Johnson testified that Vance had told a group of new male recruits that they should watch out for the females because women soldiers would use complaints and crying to get out of hard work. Private First Class Maya Rodriguez, barely 20 years old, testified through tears that Vance had cornered her in the motor pool and told her she'd probably gotten pregnant on purpose when she'd requested leave for a medical appointment. With each testimony, Sarah watched the three men at the defense table. Vance kept his eyes down. Torres shifted uncomfortably. Blake's jaw was clenched tight. The defense attorney, a captain named Morrison, tried his best. He argued that the mess hall incident was a misunderstanding, that Vance had genuinely believed he was enforcing regulations. He pointed out that no one had stopped Vance, suggesting that others must have agreed with his assessment of Sarah's hair. Major Stevens destroyed that argument in her closing statement. The defense wants you to believe that 3 grown men, trained soldiers, somehow didn't understand that physically restraining and forcibly cutting a superior officer's hair was wrong. She paced in front of the jury of officers. They want you to believe that Sergeant Vance was enforcing regulations, even though multiple witnesses testified that Captain Mitchell's hair was perfectly within standards. Stevens turned to look directly at Vance. But let's talk about what really happened here. Sergeant Vance has a documented pattern of harassment toward women soldiers. He has expressed repeatedly his belief that women don't belong in the military. And on that Tuesday morning, he saw an opportunity to humiliate a female superior officer in front of an audience. He saw a chance to put Captain Mitchell in her place, as he saw it. She pulled up the hospital photographs on the courtroom screen. Sarah's scalp, covered in cuts and scrapes, filled the display. Several jury members winced. These injuries weren't caused by a careful regulation haircut. They were caused by violence, by anger, by a man who was so threatened by a woman's authority that he physically assaulted her. Stevens let that sink in. And make no mistake, this was an assault. Sergeant Vance put his hands on a superior officer without permission. He restrained her against her will. He used a weapon. Yes, those clippers are classified as a weapon in this context, to inflict injury and humiliation. The defense attorney objected, but the judge overruled him. Stevens continued, Captain Mitchell has served this country with honor for 15 years. She has earned her rank. She has earned her medals. She has earned the respect that Sergeant Vance decided she didn't deserve simply because she's a woman. Sarah sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She refused to show any emotion, even though Stevens's words cut deep. The defense suggests that no one stopped Sergeant Vance, so perhaps others agreed with him. But let me offer another explanation. No one stopped him because they were shocked, because they couldn't believe a soldier would be brazen enough to assault an officer in broad daylight, and by the time they realized what was happening, it was over. Stevens turned back to the jury. Sergeant Vance counted on that shock. He counted on the confusion. He counted on people being too uncomfortable to intervene. And he counted on Captain Mitchell being too professional, too disciplined to fight back physically and risk her own career. The courtroom was silent. Don't let him be right, Stevens said quietly. Don't let this stand. These three men violated every principle of military honor and discipline. They attacked one of their own. They deserve to be held accountable. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their faces were grave. On the charge of assault against a superior officer, we find the defendants guilty.